Hi there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. I don't know about you, but I am a procrastinator. Every time I quilt a bunch of quilts that I have saved up over a few months, I say to myself, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to let them build up like this, but I do it anyway. So I'm going to take you through a really quick and easy way I use to finish off some of my quilts that I'm donating or giving away, and I'll show you what I did. The first thing we need to do is make some straight edges. So the way I do that is just take my longest ruler and I line it up with a seam on my border, and that makes it easy for me to make a nice straight edge. In this case, I'm lining up at 5.5 inches and trimming away anything that goes over that. So what happens when you have a wider border? For this quilt, my top and bottom borders were wider than my sides. So what I am doing is pairing up 2 rulers to bridge that gap. So what I did was take my 12.5 inch square ruler. I laid it down on the seam line so that the 1.5 inch line was covering my seam line. Made sure it was straight. Then I laid down my longer ruler that is 6 inches wide and got a nice straight edge for trimming. And again, I'm matching up the 1.5 inch line on my ruler to the seam line. Then I'm putting my 6 inch wide long ruler alongside that, and that gives me a nice straight edge for cutting. And once it's laid down in place, I can move my hand over to the cutting ruler. All right, let's move on to a different quilt. Here I already have a quilt sandwich completed. I have pinned it together. I've put pins in the middle of my squares of my quilt. I have set my machine to a zigzag stitch, and I am simply holding my quilt sandwich together, and I am quilting with a walking foot. I am quilting my zigzag stitch over the top of every seam line. I started in the middle of the quilt and worked my way to the outside, going one direction. Then I flipped my quilt the other way and I stitched on top of all the seam lines, going both horizontal and vertical. Well, now that we have quilted with the zigzag stitch, it's time to add some binding to finish off our quilt. I have this big ball of 2.5-inch wide strip that I made. I attached many strips together and then I pressed the strips in half, so the width of this binding folded over is 1.25 inches. So I'm going to attach this binding to the back side of my quilt. I am attaching it with just a straight stitch at a 2.5 stitch length. I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail at the beginning before I start stitching, so that when I come around the other side and get all the way around this quilt, I'll be able to put the two ends together. And you can see here I am still using my walking foot because that does have the feed dog on the bottom of my machine, and then the walking foot itself has fabric grabbers, and that helps the fabric all go through consistently. And I am keeping the raw edges of my folded binding strip even with the raw edge of my quilt. All right, let's talk about the corners. When you are getting ready to approach the corner, you want to stop 1/4 inch before you get to the end of the quilt. Then you will sew to the corner of the quilt at a 45-degree angle and cut your thread. Now you'll see I'm folding my binding strip at that 45-degree angle, then I'm folding it back down at a 90-degree angle. So that's kind of a tricky concept, but practice makes perfect. Once I've got that folded down, I kind of hold it in place, take it back to the machine, and start stitching my straight edge again. Okay, let's take one more look at the corner. Here you see I'm stitching to the end, but I stop 1/4 inch before I get to the end. Then I sew off at a diagonal 45-degree angle. Then I'll fold that binding strip up at that 45-degree angle. Then I'll flip it and fold it back down at the 90-degree angle. Then I'm going to take that to the machine and I'm going to start stitching a straight edge again. And here you see I am taking that to the machine, holding it in place, and I'm going to start my straight stitch again with my walking foot. Okay, so we've gotten to the end. We need to put our two tails together. I am going to show you one of many ways to do the binding. This is a way I use when I'm kind of in a hurry. I fold the strip on the left down at a 45-degree angle, and then I fold it on that binding crease where I pressed it, and then I pin that to the quilt back. So the strip on the left has a little triangle opening where that fold is, and what I'm going to do is cut the other tail at an angle that's about 1/2 inch longer than that triangle opening, and I'm just going to tuck that inside that triangle opening, pin it down, and then I'm going to finish stitching this binding to the quilt back. Now if this quilt was large, I might flip all that binding around to the front of the quilt and clip it or pin it, but this quilt was pretty small, so I felt confident just folding it over and stitching it down. And I believe on this one I was using a zigzag stitch or some other kind of decorative stitch to stitch this down to the front of the quilt. Okay, when I get to the corner of this binding, what I do is I fold it over and kind of smooth it down, and you can see that it's going to make a little 45-degree angle there on the corner, and that way I'm going to be able to fold that bottom edge up and make a nice little mitered corner. As you can imagine, there are many ways to finish your quilt top. This is only one of many ways. One way that a lot of people do is to stitch to the front first, then flip that binding around to the back and hand stitch it for a nice finished look. So using some of these faster methods, I was able to finish about 15 quilt tops completely in 2 weeks, working after work and on weekends. Thank you for joining me today for this little tutorial. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope to see you back real soon.